Good morning, Mayor, council members, and the entire collective city manager. Thank you all for having me. Keyar Doyle, Durham County Tax Administrator with the Durham County Tax Administration. I am going to go through this presentation specific to what's taken place over the last 6 months, but I'm gonna start with the general overview in regards to the reappraisal itself. I will try to touch on the points that I think are pertinent, but I will make sure that I am as brief as possible on these slides so that you have time to ask questions. I want to make sure that I answer any questions that are needed that may not be covered in this particular presentation. So I'm gonna jump right in. Sure, okay, there we go. All right, so general overview. Durham County Department of Tax Administration conducted a 2025 reappraisal that led to a historical increase in real property value. That increase led to a record number of residential and commercial appeals. Those appeals led to a record number of hearings scheduled before the Board of Equalization and Review and the Property Tax Commission on the state level. These are things that were, in a general nature, expected due to the amount of increase that the County of Durham experienced over a 6-year period. So the last reappraisal was in 2019. Between 2019 and 2025, we experienced an explosion in real estate sales, and we also experienced a pandemic, all right? So there are two things happening during that time period: growth, high sales, a pandemic. Those are three things to keep in mind during this presentation. All right, the reappraisal process. Local real estate market data is collected and analyzed during 2 years preceding the reappraisal date. In this case, that was January 1, 2025. This particular part of the process makes up the first year. Land and improvement pricing begins by February of the second year and the final year of that particular cycle. It's a 4-year cycle. Last 2 years leading up to the reappraisal date is where the work is taking place in regards to the market being measured. Building the schedule of values takes place. That property data used for modeling, specification, model calibrating, and establishing the schedule of values, which is eventually turned into the Board of County Commissioners to be adopted. And we are shooting for an October date with that submission to that particular Board of County Commissioners. So the work that's being done, I'm going to illustrate on the very next slide. This is a very important slide. 2-year process. I started this slide to show February 23, and unfortunately the caption is covering it, but that February 23 value is roughly $383,000 for the County of Durham and about $385,000 for the City of Durham. All right, that's February of 23. That's the beginning of the reappraisal cycle. That's when the data is being measured. If you notice, through the 2-year period, values went up, peaked at 460, and then they started to decline. Unfortunately, the work we've done is being turned in. So we see the market going the other way, but the work we've done for the first year and about 6 months or so is already done and is being turned in to the Board of County Commissioners for the adoption of the schedule of values. So we're looking at a market that was still rising and had been rising for the past 6 years, and we're starting to see it tinker off towards the middle of 24. All right, going into January 1, 2025, this is the market. All right, appeals. During a typical year, the Department of Tax Administration receives anywhere between 75 to 200 appeals. That's a typical year. Regular year has nothing to do with anything. You have a right to appeal every year. It doesn't matter if you appealed last year. It doesn't matter if you appealed the year before. You have a right to appeal property value. That's personal, residential, that's commercial. Have a right to appeal every year. So an appeal itself is not looked at as a measure because it's not based on anything other than your right to appeal and your desire to do so. All right? But in a typical year, the tax office receives anywhere between 75 to 200 appeals. During a reappraisal year, traditionally, the County of Durham has received anywhere between 4,500 and 7,500. January 1, 2025 reappraisal, we received 10,533 appeals. Appeal impacts. The appeal deadline was set for June 16th. Now, typically, the appeal deadline is somewhere around the first week of May. All right, due to what we were expecting with this particular reappraisal, because of the amount of increase we saw in the actual real estate market, we decided it would be fair to the citizenry to extend this first year of the reappraisal. So we went an extra month. That is very important because it impacts other things. It's good for the taxpayer and the property owners, but it impacts budget processes. The budget figures were needed from the Department of Tax Administration about a month or so earlier than June 16th. So we had to do some estimating, projecting, and kind of project exactly where we thought we might be in regards to the appeals we would receive by June 16th. And they're asking for numbers in early May. So require estimates to be made regarding how many appeals will be received. Total received appeals are used to assist in projecting holdbacks. Very important process in regards to budgeting. Has nothing to do with the reappraisal process and establishing values. This is a budget process. 7,500 were estimated on May 19th of 2024. There were a total of 5,436 appeals received 2 weeks before that June 16th deadline. We ended up receiving 10,533. So there were roughly 3,000 appeals unaccounted for in our budgeting process. Holdbacks. Holdbacks for potential appeals, exemptions, et cetera, is essential for real property valuation. A safe number, but not too conservative, is the goal. Holding back too much reduces budgeted revenue and overestimates potential loss due to appeals. Hold back too little, and it puts a significant risk on meeting budgeted revenue and underestimates potential loss due to appeals. Impacts of this past reappraisal's appeal cycle. The impacts of residential versus commercial. Very important slide. Typical issues found during mass appraisal. Typical. You're going to come across some things that are brought to the office's attention because you have appeals. Appeals are a good thing. It's a good part of the process, and it actually is something that staff uses to make sure that the accuracy of our data is improved with every cycle. But these are typical types of issues. I'm using this to show the difference between commercial and residential. All right, so typical issues found during a mass appraisal. Properties identified with incorrect year built based on properties being moved in the mid-'80s. This is a real issue that was discovered this particular past year. Parcels of homes where the original construction took place in the 1950s. Structures were moved to the Crest Street community. Year built was changed over 40 years ago. All right, so these properties were built in the 1950s and they were moved in the 80s. And when that took place, their year built was changed. So it went from 1950 to 1985. All right, so during this particular process, this being brought to our attention, these properties needing to be corrected, 96 parcels total were impacted. 40 parcels ended up receiving an adjustment. All right. This reduction in value amounted to $1,460,000. 40 properties, 40 residential properties were impacted. To make the correction to those properties impacted $1,460,000 in value, all right? Properties that needed condition adjustments that could only be observed internally. Commercial sales challenged based on income values impacted by dramatic vacancy issues. This is going to show you the difference between residential and commercial. 40 properties, $1 million, 1.4. Apartments and office buildings, drastic value changes. Value change. Total commercial properties appealed was 1,165. Total residential properties appealed was 9,235. The appeal reductions to budgeted total 3.1 billion in value. The total appeal reductions to total value prior to holdbacks was 4.3 billion. Total tax exemptions loss including 320 million. Yes.
While we're on this slide, can you just slow down just a little bit and break some of this down for us? So, do we know then? I mean, you've got here residential properties appealed 9,000. Do we know the percentage that was the percentage of those appeals that were successful, and also how it broke down between the total reduction between these residential versus the commercial properties?
Yes. So in short, residential properties accounted for less than $1 billion worth of value change. Closer to 500 million than 1 billion. So the bulk of the adjustment you see is commercial property.
And they were only
There were only
1,165. And they accounted for?
Which goes back to the slide I just showed you, and I'm going to elaborate on the coming slides. But 40 properties being adjusted only impacted us $1 million. 40 properties. Those are residential homes. And I'm going to show you the difference between residential and commercial.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
But that was a good question. Thank you.
Yeah, and then are you going to get to success rate of those appeals?
We can talk about that right now. So that's a layered question. If you have a $400,000 appeal and you appeal your property value and you receive a $6,000 adjustment, it went from 400,000 to 394,000. It's an adjustment. Do you consider that a success or just an adjustment?
Well, I would like to know how many went down.
But that's what I would be asking. So total adjusted properties, that is the total adjusted properties for each property. Each one of those properties got either a no change or a change that might have been $1,000, or it could have been $20,000, or it could have been millions of dollars. But to give you actual no changes versus a change, I would have to make sure that we give you that accurately.
Okay,
I can tell
would
you
like
that
to see that and I would
Okay.
particularly like to see it between the residential and the commercial properties.
Okay. I will definitely give you the numbers in regards to no change versus a change.
Right.
Because I think it's a little misleading.
Yes, I hear what you're saying.
And then what's a change versus what's not a change.
We're going to be able to compare that with
Right.
the data that you're getting to about the very few properties that were sort of the bulk of the actual dollar amount valuation issue. Or the few appeals that were the bulk.
Yes. Any more questions about this particular slide? Yes.
The fourth bullet, total appeal reductions to total value prior to holdbacks was 4.3 billion.
Yes.
Explain that one, yeah.
So if I go back a couple of slides, what did I just do? Okay. Because of this decline that we were seeing, we knew that we were going to end up on the high end of things because we're turning in our work while the market is going down. Now, how much is going to go down, we don't know. All right? So because of that, it's too late to make adjustments to value. So we assume there are going to be some losses due to, I have $400,000 value, but because the last 4 months of this cycle, I can probably find some 350 sales to support my appraisal or to support my appeal about my appraisal, all right? So we took some value off saying we're expecting some losses here, all right? We were also expecting losses on the commercial side, but to what extent, all right? So that's what holdbacks, and holdbacks are not specific to a reappraisal. Holdbacks happen every year, all right? We're holding back for appeals, we're holding back for tax relief, tax exemptions, exclusions, things that are unforeseen, things that you have no control over. Somebody has $50 million property, they file a tax exclusion or exemption application, and they receive a 75% discount. So that's value that we have on the books that comes off the books. and you can't project it. So holdbacks happen every year. During a reappraisal year, you try to increase the holdbacks because you're expecting more appeals and you still have those uncertainties to take place. All right. All right, so get back to the slide we were headed to. All right. One more time back to this slide. The last bullet represents tax exemption losses. That kind of goes back to what we
Question
were
was
just...
on the fourth one. So like appeal reductions to total value prior to holdbacks total 4.3 billion. So you were...
It's including the 3.1, but yes. So on top of the 3.1, whatever did not make it to the budgeted amount was held back. Nobody ever saw those numbers. Budget holds back value that they're not using for budgeting because they don't know if this is going to stick. That's every year. That's what you're seeing. So what was budgeted, what you can see online, what's publicized, what was used for the budget last year, that number is what we were tracking in regards to where are we with regards to budget. Holdbacks is not necessarily a number that anybody sees, but it's already being considered in regards to what we might lose with appeals, with exemptions, with any type of uncertainties that happen from year to year. Of course, during a reappraisal year, you expect the appeals to be more because there are more appeals. But holdbacks in general are not specific to appeals.
So the 4.3 billion was before the 3.1 billion in holdbacks? Or is that included in the 3.1?
3.1 is inside that 4.3.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Just a related question to make sure I understand. I guess like how much was a surprise? Like how much did we not budget? You know, you
All
tried to do the
of it.
holdbacks.
All of it is a surprise.
So you did the holdbacks and
Yes.
then the 4.3 billion.
We did the holdbacks, and I believe the holdbacks equated to somewhere around 1.5, 1.6, somewhere in that ballpark. But the amount of losses that we received were not expected. We knew they were possible, but not to that extent. But I'll get into those losses very next couple of slides. But if there are any questions specific to this slide, please.
No, I was just going to ask if you can finish. I know like we had quite a bit of back and forth. Like, you were going to start off on something about a tax exemption loss included, and then like you kind of...
Right. Well, I just wanted to make sure that that's appeals. Appeals can be, there's math in place to help us try to contain or understand what types of appeal losses may exist. All right. Based on what I was explaining previously, the difference between this particular season or cycle was the actual appeal deadline being after things needed to be a little more concrete for budgeting purposes. So to be able to say we have 10,533 appeals, we can base some thoughts and math around holdbacks off 10,533 appeals. All right? We were using 7,500 because we were at 5,000 when the questions were being asked. We projected 7,500. We ended up getting 3,000 in the very last weekend. So we ended up at 10,533. So budgeting processes were based on 7,500, never 10,533. Couple that with what I'm gonna show you on the next couple of slides, you'll understand exactly the impacts to projecting versus knowing how many appeals we have and what takes place.
I'll wait. I'm just
Okay.
interested in what drew this last minute surge, but you may get to it, so I'll just wait.
Okay. All right, so the commercial market, this is what's taking place in those last 6 months to even now, still going on. Durham office buildings raised for new apartments. This is just commercial market information. Former IBM building sees price drop nearly $20 million. What our office does during the valuing process and what we're doing during all of this 2-year cycle of putting the values together, reading the market, establishing value. This is a perfect example of the way these things calculate in the system. So what you're looking at here is a sale price of $35 million. You see a cost value approach and you see an income value. So in this particular case, just showing you a screenshot of how these things shake out. Here we go, 35 million. Have an income approach value of 35,957 and a cost approach of 42 million. So we have a sale for 35 million, we have a cost approach showing 42 million, and we have an income value of 35. And then we have these types of scenarios. Have $81 million sale, have a cost approach of $103 million, then I have an income approach of $71 million. Here I have another sale, 85 million, cost approach very close, 85, and then income is 77. Now these are not drastic, seen a lot worse in regards to the difference between that sale price and the income value. Yes.
Do you want to finish any point you're making?
Well, I'm just running through these slides,
Okay.
and then we're pretty much at the end, so you
Okay.
have free fire.
Cool.
Okay.
I'm just curious about how does the income-based approach work?
Mm-hmm.
And then do they just get to choose between cost or income?
They don't get to choose, no. But as appraisers, we have to honor all three approaches to value. So we have to consider all three approaches. But I can definitely dig into that in just a second.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so this is just showing the trend. $84 million sale, $75 million cost approach, income value came in at 68. All right, so what we plan to do is to actually communicate with the actual owners of these commercial properties. What we've done in the past is we have their data, but it can be dated. And then we buy data from vendors to provide us market information, all right? That market information, unfortunately, was purchased in 2024 around January. So our data is consistent with when we purchased it, all right? Now, what I'm gonna do as an owner of a business is I'm going to go to the bank, I'm gonna show $85 million in value. But when it's time to pay taxes, income taxes, I'm going to show as little as possible. It's the same game that we all play as personal individuals. We show high when we want a loan, we show low when we want to pay less. Businesses do the same thing. So if their income value can support a lower value and they can prove it, they bring it in. But they don't have it. It's not in that same data that we bought, because that data that we bought is bank information. It's the type of information that they use to get loans. And we use vendors, and those vendors provide us that information. How recent, how timely that information can be is very, very, very critical in this particular market. It won't always matter. But we're in a market that the last 6 months of it started heading in a different direction. What we spent a year and a half doing was in a higher base, and we paid for data that showed a higher base. Everyone didn't get to capitalize off of lower rents and coming into our office and going to the Board of Equalization and Review and showing drastic differences, but a lot did, all right? So what we plan to do is make sure that we get that information throughout the year, not just during a reappraisal, but every year throughout the year, and we're keeping that information from them current as possible. Attaining the most recent property characteristics from owners, residential and commercial, through multiple communications should improve timely data collection. Continuously collected market data supplemented by direct owner data will decrease information gaps. In general, the number of appeals and resulting valuation changes were higher than prior years. They reflect the operation of a statutory process responding to rapid shifts in market conditions following a significant reappraisal. Appeals are inherent part of the property tax system and serve to ensure the property assessments remain fair, equitable, and aligned with current market realities. This reevaluation reflects growth in our community. Real property valuations increased close to 70% from the prior reevaluation, 6 years, with values rising from 43 billion to more than 72 billion. And that's just real property. We're not talking about business personal property. We're not talking about registered motor vehicles. We aren't including the public utility that grew tremendously. So across the board, still strong. Value adjustments resulting from appeal process is better understood not as a sign of economic weakness, but as a recalibration within an otherwise strong market. I am ready for the questions and the discussion.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for coming in. I know you're very busy and have a lot of work to do, so thank you for coming into City Hall to present to us and have this conversation. I'm curious, I want to come back to the income versus cost. So they can, some of them, the more sophisticated ones especially, can hire, I assume, hire a law firm or something like that who has a lot of experience, and maybe some of these have very good track records of winning cases and can present favorable information to the BOER. What discretion does the BOER have? Can they, if there's a cost-based approach that's showing one number and an income-based approach that's showing another number, does the BOER have to, I mean, it looked like in the examples that we were looking at here, the BOER was accepting the lower one, but do they have to do that?
Good question. So typically, appraisers have to acknowledge all three values, all right? They have to see all three values, and they have to consider all three values. Typically, in a strong market, those three values are very close, all right? In a market that we are coming out of, hopefully, and not going to stay in too much longer, if you are driving through Durham right now, you see spaces for lease. You see vacancies, all right? So somebody purchased that building for $100 million, $50 million. They purchased that building for $50 million, and they did that with an expectation on return on investment. All right, so now we're looking at the sales comparison method, and we're also looking at income because return on investment is all about income. So those where those two approaches are going to be considered. The cost approach is what our system is based on. That is the schedule of values. All right, so everything that we have measured from the market, we have put into that system, it is going to produce a cost approach value. All right, so when people appeal and when we are analyzing our data, we are analyzing our data based off of, we have the cost approach in the system, it's built in, and then we are checking those values with the income approach and the sales comparison approach. All right, so to answer your question specifically, if a property owner appeals their value, they are going to appeal their value and they're going to lean towards whichever value is more beneficial to them, all right? Now, the Board of Equalization and Review has a job to do. They are a neutral party. They don't work for Durham County. They represent the Board of County Commissioners in regards to the role that they play in mediating and establishing value, but they don't represent the tax office, so they're not working with us, all right? But they're not necessarily working against us either. All right, so in a lot of cases, we have the commercial entities who have the ability to appeal, control the continuances, control kind of how and when they are ready to present, things of that nature take place. So this goes into the timing that the mayor was bringing up. How did it happen so fast? All right, so by January, February, there was already a realized loss from the holdback figure. We're already close to the budgeted amount, all right? But we still have an abundance of commercial appeals left. Residential's been steady. No playing around, they aren't holding appeals. They're pretty steady throughout from March to January 5. We are always shooting for January 5th, delinquency. We want all appeals done by January 5th. But they have a right to be heard. And with 10,500 appeals, we kind of didn't have any control over getting that done in a timely fashion that we would have preferred. The board worked with us. They increased their meetings. They went from 1 meeting a week to 3 meetings a week. So they did the best they could to get these hearings heard. At the end, we ended up with commercial being the bulk of the last 2 months of appeals, all right? And what they're doing is they are waiting and they are gathering their information. And in some cases, they had good information. Had we had that information a year and a half prior, we would have used their information and we wouldn't be here with the value that they ended up receiving. Now, did that information exist a year and a half earlier? That's debatable. We had sales to show what they paid for the property, but that property was vacant or had vacancies going into January 1, 2025. So I paid a good price, 2023, 2022, but I'm not getting a return on investment that I paid for or that I was projecting, and I have data that supports a lower value. What's right or wrong, what should be honored, that's another debate. But if you have data that supports that value, we have to consider it. So it's not all the Board of Equalization and Review. If that data is presented to an appraiser, that appraiser would consider it.
But the the BOER can reject a request for.
They can reject, they can no change it, they can raise it, and they can lower it.
Okay.
Yes.
They have that discretion. They'll consider the evidence that's presented by what we call it, the applicant,
Yes, the appellant.
and make the appellant and make a determination. And so can you coming back to the mayor's question earlier? So you talked about a massive influx, and in the last couple weeks or months, it was mostly, if not, and vastly, the majority was commercial. So did they have more time? It was like an extension of time. Did they have more time to appeal?
They had a lot of continuances and they had a lot of last minute appeals. So a lot of those appeals came in at the last minute. Appraisers have to contact them, just like they contact residential appeals. And they actually try to get as much information as they can during this process before going to the board. Is there any new information? Is there anything we don't have? So those conversations take place. The amount of information being exchanged between a property owner such as myself and a commercial entity is drastically different. So as a property owner, I might have an appeal and I might have an appraisal from a bank or a mortgage lender to support my appeal. I might also have some data that I pulled myself versus commercial entities. They might appeal 1,000, they might put in 1,000 appeals at one time, for one. And then on top of that, one case brief could be 800 pages. So it's just a difference in regards to the amount of detail and nuance that goes into a commercial appeal versus a residential appeal. We take them all the same. We evaluate them all the same. They're all just as important, but it's a different amount of work. So if there are any issues, then we're going back and forth. Those aren't just appellant turns in an appeal. We just take it, our staff reviews it and says yay or nay. Sometimes the staff want more information or they have questions. So these things can be ongoing. A lot of those appeals, the board ruled with a value, and because of the way commercial entities work, they're still going to the Property Tax Commission for future decreases or further fight. So it's just the nature of commercial versus residential.
Can you break down, thank you for that. Can you break down within the commercial category roughly? I mean, do you have any sense of roughly the proportion that is multifamily versus office versus industrial?
No, I don't have those percentages for you offhand. I will tell you that the overwhelming majority of these particular appeals, the value changes came from apartments and office buildings.
Okay.
Yep.
So grouping those together, apartments and office buildings.
Yes, and apartments in our world would be anything over a quadruplex. So any type of unit that has 5 or more units, we're looking at that and classifying that towards an apartment. But for the most part, apartments and office buildings were the #1 vacancy riddled.
So the
property
vacancy
types.
here really matters and plays a huge role.
Vacancy matters, yes.
Okay. 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 And so they're showing the vacancies in their appeals when they're
Yes.
when they're saying, hey, don't just look at the cost-based approach, look at the income-based approach.
Yes.
Look at all the vacancies I have
Right.
in my building. And that's used to justify.
Well, it's a challenge. If we have market data, which we paid for again, we purchased market data, and that market data we were using going into this reappraisal. So we thought we had market data from the market, okay? So we have data that is supported, we've used, and then Mr. Baker says, no, my property has more vacancy than what you're showing, and here's my data to support that. We can't ignore that data once we have it. Now, if we don't have it and you don't appeal, you have a market data value, all right? But once you have shown us actuals, we have to replace that. Just as a residential homeowner, they have market data for their value, and then they challenge that value and say, no, I don't have a brand new kitchen. I don't have upgraded bathrooms. I don't have hardwood floors. I still have carpet. We make that change to that property because they were being considered with a property that has some upgrades that they should not have been given themselves. So it's the same concept. Residential and commercial are treated the same in that regard. If you have data that contradicts what we have, that's the point of your appeal, to submit an appeal and challenge that particular difference.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I think I'll have a few more questions, but I don't want to hog it. Turn it over to colleagues.
Yeah, I want to just add in a quick comment. And this is such a nuanced reality here. I'm really interested in I understand that the BOER is a quasi-judicial board. But I'm really interested in considering we're in 2026. Is there any possibility in regards to safeguards where real-time data could be digitally put in and assessed rather than waiting? I'm just saying this is 2026, and we literally have a dysfunctional system here. That is, it appears to be dysfunctional, considering that one can not even say it intentionally, but it appears that it could be easily manipulated based on the capacity of us being able to value. I mean, we're talking about balancing a city budget here, but we're doing it on stilts. We're very unstable, considering when information can be inserted, when information can be assessed. And it kind of caught you guys off guard, you know. So I'm thinking about what safeguards could be put in place. What resources does the Board of Evaluation and Review have, Equalization and Review have? What could they use, you know? I mean, when you say there is an applicant to have one briefing of 800 pages and thousands of, appeals, I don't know any department in the city or county that can handle that amount of information in a timely manner.
So I do not know the answer to that. That's a brilliant question. I do not know the answer to that. I think that real-time data submission would be wonderful. I don't know the capabilities.
Give me a software engineer. We need to get rich
Right.
here.
Yeah, that is a brilliant thought, and I think it would change the capabilities across the board. The thing that's very important to understand here is Durham County has a good, strong market. What we do have is a vacancy issue. It appears to be getting better. I don't see as many for lease signs. There appears to be a resurgence of the things we need to see. But during the time that mattered, we had high sales and we had vacancies. And there were two particular property types that actually, whether you want to say benefited from it or were impacted by it, because I don't think they benefited. They think that they bought something with the intentions of making a certain type of return on investment, and they cannot realize that. So I think it's two different perspectives in regards to how you want to look at value. I think that the intention to purchase a property is based on your return on investment. So if I've purchased a property with the expectation that I'm going to receive a certain type of income from this particular property and its function, that value is completely tied to, from my perspective, as a business person, as somebody who purchased the property, that value is connected. It can't just be my sale price and then my return on investment is unrealized and it doesn't matter in regards to what the complete value is for this property. So as an appraiser, appraisers have to consider that. And I want to make sure that I'm very clear. I do not look at this as the Board of Equalization and Review, because I think in regards to our particular Board of Equalization and Review, I can't speak for all Board of Equalization and Reviews. I think we have a very experienced, and I respect the fact that they are real estate people. Some Board of Equalization and Reviews are, no disrespect to other boards, but sometimes they're passing people that might not have real estate experience. So they're making decisions without having a real estate background. I don't agree with all of their decisions, but I'm glad to have people who understand real estate.
Right. So, and I do know, I was looking it up, I do know some of them, and I know they're well-experienced folks.
Yes.
I'm not even questioning their intent, more so questioning the capacity, of what they have. I also want to add a little context to this conversation because I sense a road that we may be going down for potential political argument. When you say there is a vacancy issue, I think we need to provide full context to that. We have apartments that have vacancies in them, and then there is a need for housing and how those two things balance one another.
Right.
And I think in any case, there's going to be some type of, whether wittingly or unwittingly, market manipulation.
Yeah.
And that is something I think we have to be very honest about.
Yes.
But I want to be very careful of, if projecting that, this is full market manipulation and we don't need any more housing. That's going to hurt a lot of people because we're specifically talking about apartments and office buildings here. Not everyone is going to live in an apartment, and not everyone is going to be in that same geographic of the locality. So I just wanted to provide some context there as we were going with these comments.
I agree. I think that this is a bigger issue. It's not about Durham. There are multiple things impacting the office sector. My office benefits from remote work. That's a real thing. It impacts the actual ability for these businesses to rent out space in these office buildings. So there are numerous things that are not Durham specific, but these things did impact us. This is the first reappraisal since the pandemic. So there are things within this particular market that we've never had to account for before.
Thank you. I have more comments, but I'll pass it over to my colleagues and come back. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Couple of questions. State statute is we have to reevaluate every 8 years?
Yes.
Okay. So that's one question. And then the Board of Equalization and Review, who appoints them?
County commissioners.
Is there any, and some of these may be not for you, Mr. Doyle, it could be questions that just need to be answered. Are there any examples with that board that are multi-jurisdictionally appointed, so not just county commissioners?
Not that I'm aware of.
Are you aware of any legal limitations as to why are they the only entity that is allowed to appoint to that board?
To my knowledge, yes. And they must be residents of Durham County.
Thank you. Is there, so some of these things, I think either if the city attorney's office could follow up with the county attorney, I would like to understand the legal limitations on if only, some boards are both city and county appointed. I would like to know if there is an opportunity, if that's state statute or if there's flexibility on that. And I hear the Durham resident component, that's how most of our boards are. You have to, some of them you can work here and not live here, but most of them are required residency. So that's one question. Was there an understanding, because at some point, I believe the county, maybe that's the policy now, county commissioners have moved that they're going to do every 4-year reevaluation because the volatility in the market. Do you know if that's going to be their policy moving forward?
Is my expectation is that they chose a 4-year reappraisal cycle back in 2019. The only reason it went 6 years was because of the pandemic. So
Okay.
I believe that the 4-year cycle was their expectation and is their continued expectation.
But that's a policy on their side, not like an ordinance.
Correct. The state only requires a reappraisal be done at least
Yeah.
once every 8 years.
I mean, a local ordinance, not a state ordinance. Because a
Right.
policy, it's easier or harder as a board to go against your own policy than I would say an ordinance, right? So that's a different level of different burden.
Right. The commissioners set that 4-year cycle, and they, to my knowledge, would like to stick to it.
Okay. And then the other question I have, when y'all decided to kick off the reevaluation process, was there ever any analysis done? Because North Carolina generally, it makes sense why we are here in some ways, and in some ways it doesn't. And I will say that it's not anything to do with the work of your office. I think your office has done what it could do with the data it had, as you've noted. And I think you were in a challenging moment in a very volatile market. Residential was skyrocketing, offices were vacant. That was a national trend. I'm just curious, as you all are, embarking in this process, we know North Carolina, for lack of a better word, is hot market-wise across the state. Was there any conversations with other counties on their reevaluations, kind of some best practices gleaned or an understanding because they had maybe gone through a reevaluation in a rocky market and maybe there were some things that we could have implemented here had we known about it. So just wondering if y'all had done any outreach to other offices.
Constant, and it's still ongoing. Because we're gearing up for 29 in
Yeah.
about 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
So we'll be getting started on 29.
I remember when you presented at Joint City County, I think maybe early in 2025. I would like at some point, and this is for city staff, another kind of conversation with your office at a Joint City County meeting, specifically on, since you are gearing up for 2029, you're going to do an analysis of what went wrong and what didn't. I, as city council, would like to have that information, and I would like to have opportunity as a council member, because at the end of the day, we share this, we have no say, but we share the same burden. And so I think that there needs to be opportunity for the city to have insight in a way that was not provided or implemented this round. And I know that there may be some statutory requirements on that, and there may not be, and that's what we need to investigate. And so as we're gearing up for 2029, that's just something that I want to be really mindful of, because it's having a huge impact on our revenue and by default also the county. Thank you, that's all.
Mr. Rist.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Mr. Doyle, for the presentation. One more question about the folks who serve on the board. Is that like, how long is their term? Is it a 2-year term? What's the length?
2 years and 3 years.
And how many folks are on that board?
I believe right now we have 6. We just lost one, we replaced them, so I believe it's 6 now.
Okay. I'll come back to that in a second. So I appreciate what you're saying about the difference between how appraisers value commercial and residential properties, right? Because in my personal home, if I build a new home and it costs me $100,000 and it's valued at like $500,000 or valued at less than that, it doesn't matter. Like it's for a home, it's the market value. There's no cost equation for a home, right?
There is a cost approach for the home. There's a cost in a sale. There's an income if you rent it.
So all three for residential as well.
If they rent the property, there is an income value, yes.
So it could be for residential, for rental property, it could be
Yes.
income, could be cost, could be market. Those are all looked at. And are those, so are those using those different formulas, is that just kind of is that a practice in the sort of property appraisal community? Or is that, and this is a question for maybe Madam City Attorney, is that by statute, must a board of equalization review look at income, cost, and market data? Or is that simply a sort of a kind of a convention in the industry?
I don't know. I would have to research.
You
that.
know,
I haven't done
be
this
helpful.
law in a long time.
Okay.
That is appraisal. Appraisal has to honor all 3 approaches to value.
But I mean, is that by statute, or is that sort of the sort of practice in that field? That's my question.
It's actually both. It's statute and it is the practice in the field. So if you get an appraisal, if you go to a mortgage lender or a bank and get an appraisal, if you pay attention, you have 3 values. They give you an income approach on your home appraisal. You get all 3 approaches to value. Appraisers have to give all 3 approaches to value.
Right.
Now, whether it's used or not is a different story.
My question is whether that's by statute, and I appreciate the city attorney looking into that.
Okay.
Just to know what the legal basis for that is. My next question is, so I understand these late appeals came in, and I think this is what the mayor's suggesting. So, and all these questions, we're getting questions from folks in the community. They want to make sure that our process is fair, as you know, right? And so I guess the question is, how can we assure residents that those appeals that came in late in the process didn't, and some of these are like 800-page briefing books, right? How can we assure residents that didn't overwhelm the Board of Equalization review? So many at one time that just kind of had to process so quickly. How can we assure residents that?
I don't know how to assure residents of anything. The actual amount of appeals was more than they have ever received. Durham County has never received 10,533 appeals. When you say late, only 233 of those appeals were received after the deadline. So 10,300 were received on time by June 16th. All right?
Right.
So,
but there were 2,500 that you were expecting about 7,500, and we got it and that was, again, towards the end of the end of the process, where another 2,500 that we didn't expect, right?
we got 3,000 on the last weekend before the deadline.
Yeah.
But it's legally acceptable. They didn't do
Sure.
anything wrong. They just waited
Sure.
to the last minute to appeal. So we would have preferred they appealed steady throughout the time period. We were tracking, and at the time we were asked, where were we and where do we think we will be, we were at 5,300. So we estimated we should probably get around 7,500 over the next 2 weeks. We figured we would reach 7,500, which was the most we'd ever received before, 7,500. We were trending in that direction. Now, if you asked our office 4 months prior to that, I'm pretty sure most of them would have thought we were going to get 15,000 appeals because we just had a 70% increase. So we were thinking the worst because we were already doing the worst. Durham County never saw that type of value change. I went from 200,000 to 400,000. So I was expecting most people to appeal. 130,000 people, 130,000 parcels. So I was expecting a drastic number of appeals. As things went on, we were only 5,000 with 2 weeks left. So to end up at 10,533 was a big deal. And that's the start of where things went wrong.
Right,
Because we accounted for 7,500, not 10,000.
Right. And so, and I totally understand that the folks were following the process. There were, we allowed the late appeals, but a bunch came in, as you said, in that last weekend, right? And so again, my question is how do residents know that these appeals were all reviewed with the proper, that had enough time and sort of the capacity to review them all, or did they just get rushed into the very end? That's the question folks have.
Completely understand. I do not know how to make people feel comfortable with that, but I will say that our goal was to be done by January 5th. The fact that we did not finish by January 5th shows that we did take the time to handle each and every appeal. We did not finish until the month of April. I don't know any other way to make people feel comfortable with that particular fact, but the fact is, as of March 1st, when those letters went out and the appeals could start, our goal from that day forward was January 5th. You always want to make sure you're done by delinquency.
No, I understand. Again, these are the questions folks have. I also want to ask about the.
Councilmember
so you
Rist, I don't mean to butt in, but I think I might have a little follow-up question to yours about accountability.
Yeah.
Do you mind? I'll just ask one question.
Okay, go for it, yeah.
I think it's getting at your question, so I just wanted to ask. I noticed, I was just looking at the BOER website, and the last time that minutes were published was 2024, and I was just curious if there's a timeline for publishing the minutes from these meetings. Maybe that's kind of getting to your question of people being able to see the minutes from these meetings.
I did not know that date was the last time they were published, so I will check. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So, and my final set of questions around, so you said that the properties that tended to be the ones appealing were office properties with vacancies and multifamily with more than 4 units.
Those are the
residential.
biggest changes.
Yeah.
A lot of companies appealed, didn't see changes, but
There's a big change, yeah,
the
with the
biggest
offices
changes,
and the sort of
yes.
multifamily with more than 4 units. So my question is, do you have data? 'Cause as Mayor said, this becomes political. We talk about housing all the time, right? So from my perspective, short-term vacancies in the market, of housing market, could signal to owners of property, hey, I need to drop my price. And we've seen across the region, rents have kind of stabilized the last couple of years. But there's also the potential there that at this peak of the market where there may have been vacancies as we're building more to accommodate people coming here, that there were some vacancies, right? So do you have data on those multifamily residential properties that appealed with the highest value, winning appeals for the highest value? Can you tell us where those were located? Is this downtown, different parts of the city? Can you tell me if that's newer buildings, older buildings, age of the building? Do you have data on that?
I do not have
breakdown?
that data on hand, but we can definitely look into that. I do not believe that we saw as a county dramatic changes in value to duplexes and quads and triplexes amongst the city. These are apartments, like complexes.
But where are they new complexes, old? Are they located?
They're all over Durham, but I'll definitely get you that data. I don't think it was focused in one particular general area. This is
data on
scattered
location
throughout
and
the
also
county.
the age of building would be really helpful. In
Okay.
That, yeah. The other question is, so then if you appeal at a point where if there's a short-term spike in vacancies because we're building more to accommodate residents, does that mean that value then gets locked in until the next reval, or is that sort of something that's, so if your vacancy is high 1 year, then it's kind of goes down as the market, as we sort of fill in as people move in. If vacancies then lower over the course of the next 4 or 5 years before the next reval, does that mean that valuation is still locked in for that property, it's gonna be locked in, isn't it?
Their value is locked into the next reappraisal. Unless something happens to the property, they add something to the property, there's some reason to change value based off of characteristic changes. But we cannot change a value just because market changing conditions. That's the
And
point of the
vacancies are going down,
reappraisal.
but once it's set there.
Up or down. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right, colleagues, you have a question? Okay, 1 second. I am going to request that we kind of close this up, but I'm also going to request, I think when we were approaching the property evaluation, you did a lot of presentations. I don't even know how you humanly did it. I know I had you at least 12 during the financial playbook tour. And then all the others that you did. But now we have more information, more context. We also see the impact of our budgets, based on this tax information. I think it would be really helpful to do a deep dive information session on this. So I'm gonna allow a few more questions and we're gonna move on. But okay. I want the manager to address some process things and if needed. But I am going to request at a later date that we do a deep dive on understanding fully, because I think what's happening here is a lot of discovery. We're finding some vulnerabilities in the systems and the massive impact on a governing body, partially, that has such significant impact that we're not really appreciating to its fullest extent. And then how we need to really hash out this conversation more. It is going to get political. There is a lot of things that even you said today in explaining it that could be interpreted one way or the other. And I can only imagine our next zoning case, well, the tax office said, and I think that we need more context around that and have a fuller conversation. So I'll go here to Councilmember Cook, and then we'll.
Can I just say I support that deeper dive.
Sounds good.
As well.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Cook?
I'll be brief. I just want to clarify, I think I understand, but when you say that there are 3,000 appeals that were unaccounted for in the budget, what you're saying is because those were received so close to the deadline, that was not calculated in the holdback amount? Okay, just wanted to make sure. And you said that there were 233 that were done after that 6/16 deadline?
We received 10,300 or so. We ended up at 10,533. So it was about 200 or more slightly that were admitted after June 16th.
And is there discretion in accepting those late, or was everyone within a certain amount of time, all appeals accepted?
I cannot answer that question. The Board of Equalization and Review and the Property Tax Commission both have the authority to admit a untimely appeal.
Okay, so I would love some more information to hopefully facilitate a deeper discussion. The information that I would like is that information about the late appeals. To build off of what Councilmember Rist was saying, and I said earlier, about success rates of these properties, and I would like to see them broken down not only by location and potentially age of the building, but also by yeah, I mean, I would love to see like just as much detail as y'all can provide, if y'all have broken it down by age, race for residential properties, size and income for commercial properties, as much information as we can see, and have that be in comparison to the percentage that was shifted in the reappraisal value reduction.
We do have addresses. We do not have demographic information. Like, we don't have age and race. We can probably figure out a way to get that information, but we just have parcels and addresses in our system. We don't have an actual age and race.
Okay, I thought, for some reason, I'm remembering back when you brought this to us originally that we had a conversation about equity and particularly about race justice among valuations of property, and I thought that we did record that in Durham.
Somebody did do that. That wasn't Durham County. We gave data to support that project, but that wasn't, and I'm not saying we can't find that data. I'm telling you that the tax administration, our system doesn't have fields that address or specify age or race. We have addresses, we have the year build of the home, but it's characteristics of property, not people.
Okay, so I guess what I would like to know is in this appeals, I mean, I am curious to know if, back to Councilmember Baker's question, if the Board of Election, or the Board of Adjustment, the Board of
Equalization and Review.
BOER, sorry, acronyms this morning, if there was a general trend of going with the lowest of the three valuations, I would be curious to know that. I would also be curious to know what valuations were submitted by folks who did appeals, and then particularly I'm interested in understanding the shortfall that's made up by commercial appeals. I know you gave us a rough estimate. I would like to know more details in that number, and I think you said that there were about 40 properties that had a big bulk of, in more detail would be better there for us to understand sort of the proportionality of the shortfall that's made up by specific types of properties.
That specific example about the 40 properties was just an example.
Okay, just an example. I'm not going to take that.
It was real. It took place, but I'm saying that was to show the difference between value between residential properties and commercial values. That was 40 properties with $1 million value together versus the commercial properties that I tried to show how much the impacts were per property.
Okay, well, as much information as we can get about that would be helpful for us moving forward. Thank you so much, and thank you for your time in the presentation.
We're going to go to Councilmember Burrs and then our Manager Ferguson.
Just following up on the conversation in regards to 200 or so that were received late. I mean, I think that it would be helpful, I'm not going to harp on it, but like to like the method of submission, because I'm thinking like snail mail, and so possibly someone received it through the USPS, so it may be arrived. So could you include that method of delivery for those late appraisals as well, just kind of set context for it?
Mr. Ferguson.
Thank you. So I just wanted to thank the tax administrator, Mr. Doyle, for an excellent presentation in a very challenging year, and appreciate him giving time to the council. Our staff, as well as Mr. Doyle, I know have been taking copious notes during this conversation. It's clear several of you have expressed an interest in a follow-up conversation in the deep dive process. Primarily today, we wanted to get you the opportunity to understand the appeals, since we've indicated how much the appeals are a factor in this year's budget process, and I feel like there's been a full discussion of that. But I just wanted to acknowledge for council that we will convey your interest to the your partners at the county in a fuller conversation about the process, and we appreciate all the feedback. If you have additional questions that weren't covered today, if you could get those to me, we'll create sort of a summary for our partners at the county, and we can all collaborate on the best way to have that conversation. Thank you, and again, I want to thank Administrator Doyle for his time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service. Colleagues, do we need to take a 3-minute break? All right, let's take a 3